Joke. All right now. Here we go. 3 people died and went to heaven's gate. And we're talking to St. Peter. He said, I have one question, and if you get it right, I'll let you into heaven. So he asked the first person, what is Easter? She said, oh, that's the time of year when our whole family gets together and we eat turkey. St. Peter just shook his head and said, no. Said to the next person, what is Easter? And he answered, oh, that's the time of year when our family gets together and we all open presents and that fat jolly guy comes down the chimney. Again, St. Peter shook his head and turned him away. And he said to the third guy, excuse me, the third one's a woman, of course. What is Easter? And she said, oh, that's when Christ died and they put him in a tomb and rolled a rock in front of it. St. Peter smiled and he said, go ahead. Yes, go on. And the woman continued, then once a year we roll the stone away and he comes out, and if he sees a shadow, we have 6 more weeks of winter. Okay. So I'm a little bit scattered. I'm a little bit disheveled. It's been a busy last couple of weeks for me. And y'all know I have just a mild, small amount of ADD and And I have been really focusing. And so what happens after that is that I focus for a while and then my brain goes on strike. So there's really kind of no telling where we're going to go with this today. We are talking all this month, as Marcia said, about the place where humanity and divinity meet. And if you listen to the contemporary story of Christianity, meaning the story that if you grew up with it, that we all grew up with, right? It's this, well, you know, I do this spiel all the time. God is here, and we are here, and somebody a long time ago made a big giant mistake, and we are paying for it. And that we're never quite going to get it right. And so a long time ago, some benevolent, loving God sacrificed his only son so we wouldn't have to suffer eternally in hell. I thought it was really interesting that she was singing Superstition today, because that's quite a story. And it's never made sense to me, and it doesn't make sense to you probably because you're here in this room. But what's interesting is, you know, we have this idea about Christianity that at one time it was all the same. So like it was the trunk of a tree, right? And now we have like that tree has branched out, and we have Catholics and Protestants and Eastern Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, and then the Protestant branches go further, and there's Methodists and Presbyterians and Southern Baptists and Pentecostals, and you see what I'm saying? But our idea is that it all came from something that was a single teaching. And what I would like to do right now is disabuse you of that idea. And what I'd like to do further is have you reimagine that tree starting at the roots. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if you go back a couple thousand years and you think about what the world looks like. They're living in villages. There's some metropolitan areas thanks to the Greek, or maybe not thanks, but it is what it is, right? So you have these people, these groups of people meeting, sometimes in secret, sometimes in public, and they're Christians, right? So they're following in one sense or another the teachings of this rabbi named Jesus. And they can be fairly geographically separated, right? So did you ever play that game when you were a kid called, I think it was called Telephone or something? Like you sit in a circle and you whisper something to one person and they whisper it to the next and it goes all the way around. How many of y'all know what I'm talking about? Oh, thank goodness, because sometimes I don't know if they've changed the games, you know? Okay, so by the time it gets back around, it's a completely different, it's like, what? What was that? Well, so you understand that each of these groups that called themselves Christians, the teachings were somewhat different. They weren't all this one solid trunk. They were variations based on who the local leader was, what the geographic influences were, what the pagan practices that were also mixed into the area were. There's lots of different factors. But the point is, what you have are a bunch of different teachings. So then, what eventually happens is we get this thing called the Christian Bible, and of course that took place somewhere in the late 300, I think 367 AD or somewhere late, right? And that's them attempting to gather Christianity into a trunk so that it can be replicated, it can be taught. We got to know what it is. We can't just have these guys talking about this and these guys talking about this. That's not going to work. So some guys got together, and we're going to talk later on through the month about what their possible motivations were. Because I, of course, assigned them very, very negative motivations. It's a lie perpetrated by the man to try to keep our brother down. That's what that is. And that may be true to some degree, but there's more than one reason. That's my Board of Trustees chair back there getting ready to kind of maybe call a meeting, see if I need to be fired. All right. So all of the local stories that were told, some got written down. And what we call those are gospels. Right? Gospels are accountings or testimonies or this is what happened. So there's this one set of Gospels that was popular, very popular in Upper Egypt. Would you quit jumping? Is that you, Kate? Right. As I was saying before Catherine interrupted me, there was a set of Gospels popular in Upper Egypt, very heavily used in the monasteries there. And we know this because there are contemporaneous writings, right? And they are indeed known as the Gnostic Gospels. There were many of them. There was the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Peace, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas. I counted 8. So there's roughly 8 of them that I know about, and there's probably more. All right. So these monastic communities in Upper Egypt are really they're very popular. These Gospels, these Gnostic Gospels, are very popular with them. And then in the year 367, the Bishop of Egypt ordered the monks to destroy all of those Gospels. All of them. And so what happens is the monks, apparently they couldn't, because what they did, and this is a little bit like Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff right here, right? So they stuff them in a jar, and they take them out into the desert, and they hide them in a cave. Because they're so precious to them that they can't just destroy them no matter what the bishop says. Those monks were probably part of our tribe, by the way. Right? Okay, so fast forward the clock 1,600 or so years. There's a guy in Egypt, in northern Egypt, and he's a farmer and he needs some fertilizer. And what they use for fertilizer is bat guano. So he and his sons, I believe it was his sons, they go out into the northern Egyptian desert and they go in the caves looking for fertilizer. And they find this jar. And what's in the jar are some whole and some partial fragments of all of these writings from 1,600 years ago. And that is how the Gospel of Thomas comes to us. So what we're going to do this month, y'all, is look at some sets of the sayings of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas doesn't paint a big story. It's just a collection of sayings, right? And some of them could be missing. We don't know. So what I and Marcia and the practitioners have done, what we did is break them into kind of groupings, a couple of sayings per week. And as we go along in the month, I'm going to share with you some of the historical pieces. And let me tell you why that's important. Because so many of us grow up with the predominant view of Christianity that says that we are fallen or broken or sinners, that somebody else had to suffer for us. And for those of us for whom that story doesn't make sense, we can throw out the baby with the bathwater. You see what I'm saying? So the story that's presented to us doesn't make sense. My point is to tell you there's more to the story, or actually that there's another story entirely. And it paints a very different picture. Now, what I will also tell you is that it requires a lot more work. Why does it require more work? Well, here's the thing. In any spirituality, in any tradition, you have, let's call it the exoteric teachings and the esoteric teachings. What we see as Christianity today are the exoteric teachings. So it's a lot about ritual and rule and following a preset path that tells you how to behave, what to believe, usually who to hate, all that kind of stuff. So does everybody get that? Exo meaning like from the outside, right? And then every tradition contains esoteric teachings. And those are the teachings from the inside. And they require you not to just follow a preset book of rules, but to actually continually, persistently, and faithfully know for yourself what's true. Okay, well, to know something for yourself, you actually have to check in with yourself. And the thing about remembering is that it's interspersed with forgetting, right? So to walk the esoteric path of Christianity or anything else requires you to go within and do the work instead of just being handed a book that tells you what you're supposed to believe. The payoff is amazing. But it's a lifelong path. It's a journey. It's not somewhere you're going to get to, except on Tuesdays at 11:47. So make sure you're practicing on Tuesdays at 11:47. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not telling. You'll have to check both. So before I forget, I want to tell you all that most of what I'm going to talk about about the Gospel of Thomas came from the work of a theologian by the name of, or actually she's a historian as well. Elaine Pagels is her name, Pagels. And she's been working with the Gnostic Gospels her entire academic career. So let me read you one of these sayings from Thomas's Jesus. This is number 18. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Have you discovered then the beginning that you look for the end? For where the beginning is, there will the end be. Blessed is he who will take his place in the beginning. He will know the end and will not experience death." Blessed is he who will take his place in the beginning. So if you're a rabbi 2,000 years ago and somebody talks about the beginning, what are they talking about? They're talking about Genesis. They're talking about the primordial story from Genesis. In the beginning, I love you so much. No, I love my life. I love you. Right. Let there be light. Right? And so what Jesus is saying, what Thomas's Jesus is saying, is you don't need to worry about that. See, because a lot of these small communities, they were concerned about when Jesus was actually coming back, like physically coming back. And what Thomas's Jesus is telling us is you don't need to worry about what comes after. You need to worry about where you came from. And where you come from is the allness that gave birth to light. And you are the allness, and you are the light. See, that's a pretty different story than the things that are attributed to Jesus, say, in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, John's Jesus is saying, I am the way, the truth, and the light. But Thomas's Jesus is saying, go back to the beginning. We are all the way, the truth, and the light. Here's a little interesting factoid, according to Elaine Pagels. Everybody knows the term, it's been acculturated, the term doubting Thomas. Right? So that phrase, calling Thomas the doubter, only happens in John, and it happens 3 times. And there's a big body of evidence that shows that the Gospel of John was quite possibly written as a reaction to the Gospel of Thomas. So that where Thomas says you have to know for yourself and you should question everything, basically, John's like, no, you got that wrong. And if you think you need to ask any questions, you're just a doubter. But I digress. Does anybody know what I was actually talking about? Yeah, in the beginning was okay, yeah. Thank you. So Thomas's Jesus is telling us to go back to the beginning, and to identify with that, the allness that became light. And there's a part of me that feels so sad about, why do we have to tell everybody they were all screwed up? Why couldn't we tell them they were born in original blessing, not in original sin? Why couldn't we tell people that they came from the light instead of the Anyway. So I'm going to read you one more saying of Thomas. I'm going to have to leave one off because that ADD thing. Jesus goes on to say to the disciples, if they say to you, is it you? Meaning, are you the light? Say, we are its children. We are the elect of the living Father. If they ask you, what is the sign of your Father in you? Say to them, it is movement and repose. I'm going to read that again, and then I'm going to unpack it. If they say to you, is it you? Say, we are its children, meaning we are the children of the light. We are the elect of the living Father. If they ask you, what is the sign of your Father in you? Meaning, how do I know you're telling the truth? The answer to them is, it is movement and repose. So let's go back to that original primordial origin story from Genesis. On day one, God created. And then what did God do? So God creates, progressively creates, and then on the seventh day, God rests. This is a powerful, for me anyway, a powerfully nuanced and beautiful way to attune to the energy of life within me. If you've ever watched Michelle dance, you have seen the impulsion to create vividly and on display. If you've ever gotten caught up into the play of a child or your own creative project, you know what that burst of movement is. It's something in here and it's coming out here and you can't not do it. Right? And then what happens in the cycle of creativity and the cycle of creation itself is that movement comes to a natural close and we rest. It is movement and repose. See, we're getting some very powerful tips about the nature of the life force, where it came from, how it operates, but not where it's going. Because Jesus says, don't worry about that. We got that, that's later. What you need to know right now is who you are and where you came from, and what it feels like and looks like to live in the natural creative cycle of movement and repose. I have a favorite. What's a poem that's 4 lines called, y'all? I can't remember. It is kind of a haiku, but it's slightly modified from the original. It's I've read it before. You've heard me say it before. It's beautiful. I'm going to share it with you. Stillness is what creates love. Movement is what creates life. To be still and still moving. This is everything. So I want to, before we go into the closing prayer, I want to just remind everybody, let you know, whatever, that we are launching our small groups this month with a once-a-week study of the Gospel of Thomas. And all the materials are provided. We have groups in several different areas in the Metroplex. There's one on Thursday night and 2 on Monday nights. If you want to go further into the sayings that are in the Gospel of Thomas, and you're interested in joining one of those groups, please let me know after the service. I'll be glad to kind of scope out where you live and where the group is. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say, so let's pray. So I am I'm breathing into the sense of silent joy within me. And I am allowing this sense of silent joy to give rise to my words, this beautiful Easter day where all of Christendom celebrates the resurrection. We remember right here and right now that it is a sense of being reborn. And being reborn means we go back to the beginning and we remember who we are, where we came from, and what we're about. And so I know in this moment that there is one life. That life is the life of God, and that life is my life now. It is all life everywhere. It came from God. It lives as God. It creates as God. It expresses as God. And I'm lucky enough to be it, and I'm lucky enough to witness it, and I'm lucky enough to know it, and some days I'm lucky enough to remember it. And so right here, right now, I affirm and declare for myself and for everyone else that we remember moment by moment, day by day, season by season, chapter by chapter, that we are the light that came from wholeness, that moves itself into being, that rests naturally and creates yet again and again a more magnificent life, a more aligned life, a fuller life, a more loving, whole life. And being absolutely clear that this is the truth, I know that I have spoken enough words. And it is time to rest in them. And so I rest in this truth, knowing it was true before I said it, and it will be true now and always. And so it is.